All right, let's look at a theme that we've explored before in U.S. history, and that's that fear of radicalism and that fear of outsiders. We've seen a couple examples going all the way back to John Adams' presidency and them able to pass the Alien and Sedition Acts and that fear of French intervention. We've seen it with the Know Nothing Party in the 1840s and 1850s and their opposition to immigrants. And we saw it most recently with the Red Scare right after World War I. We have that same thing in the late 1940s and 1950s, a real fear of communism after World War II. There's a challenge for the U.S. government in that after World War II, which is a long war, which is an expensive war, which is a war by the time it's over, Americans are tired of it, the government has to keep people supportive of the war effort because we go right into the Cold War. And a Cold War is harder to keep people engaged in. So they have to use a lot of propaganda to depict the Soviet Union, to depict the USSR as dangerous, and that the USSR might be trying to take over the United States. And what this does is really increase fear of communism in this time period. There's a fear of communist threats, and that goes all the way to Congress. Congress creates the House Un-American Activities Committee. And this is a committee that will investigate reports of communist activity or communist spies in the American government. There's a rumor that there were communists in the Agriculture and Treasury Department during the 1930s, and the House Un-American Activities Committee is going to investigate this. Alger Hiss is a State Department official that is investigated by the House Un-American Activities and found guilty of some lesser crimes. And the State Department handles our relations with other countries. So this is very scary for Americans. And the biggest fear is that possibly our atomic secrets have been compromised. Has America's monopoly on atomic weapons been compromised by spies during the Cold War? To make sure that these problems don't become out of hand, there are extensive background checks performed by what's called the Loyalty Review Board on federal employees. They are checking to make sure no communists are hired by the government or nobody with even any communist sympathies. Some Americans lost federal jobs over simple association with radicals. If you knew a radical or were friends with a radical or even lived near a radical, some people even lost jobs over that. At this time, 11 members of the American Communist Party are charged with plotting to overthrow the government, and they are convicted and sent to jail. Now, it's not illegal to be a member of the American Communist Party, but plotting to overthrow the government is against the law, so that's why they're arrested and thrown in jail. And most famously, Ethel and Julius Rosenberg, a married couple in New York, are arrested for spying and convicted of selling nuclear secrets to the Soviet Union, and they are executed for espionage, both Ethel and Julius Rosenberg. Later research indicates that Julius probably was working as a spy, but that Ethel had nothing to do with it, yet both of them are executed, leaving their children as orphans. And in 1950, we get the peak of anti-communist fear with the emergence of the junior senator from Wisconsin, Joseph McCarthy. In 1950, McCarthy stood up in Wheeling, West Virginia, and claimed to have a list with names of known communists working in the State Department. Now, he doesn't reveal any of the names on the list. He says he has this list, and this sends people into a panic. McCarthy is very good at exploiting the press. He's always good at making accusations of people and promising new ones so that they'll come back and listen to him. He's constantly making accusations so that others were always on the defensive. Now, he doesn't have credible witnesses or credible information, really, and this process of making wild accusations without any real credibility has become known as McCarthyism as a result of this. And this type of behavior, McCarthyism, is only tolerable in a climate of paranoia, a climate of extreme fear like we had in the early 1950s. So why didn't anyone tell him to shut up? Well, he's good at intimidating other members of Congress. Remember, at this time, being accused of being a communist would be the equivalent of being called a terrorist today. He's good at going after the wealthy and the privileged. This gets him on the side of a lot of working class Americans. And he has a very simple solution. In the midst of the Korean War, he's saying, bring the troops home. Let's fight the commies here. A lot of people can get behind that message. And the Republican Party overall likes the effect. He's hitting the Truman administration pretty hard on issues of national security. The effect is that it's hurting the Democrats probably more than the Republicans. But in 1954, he goes too far, and he attacks high-ranking members of the U.S. Army. These hearings that he calls for to investigate the high-ranking members of the Army he accuses of being communists are put on television. So Americans aren't just reading about it. They aren't just hearing about it on the radio. They're watching McCarthy in real time, and the impression that a lot of people have is that this guy is just a crude jerk. He's got nothing to back up his claims. He's a blowhard, he's a bully, and he's somebody that we shouldn't be listening to. He fails in his attack on the Army, and it's downhill from there. He is censured by the U.S. Senate. This is a formal condemnation from the U.S. Senate. He's one of only 9 people to receive a censure, and he dies 3 years later after he's not reelected. His legacy, though, is that of the political conformity of the 1950s, with people like McCarthy on the prowl, ready to accuse someone of being a communist for standing out. Nobody in America wants to do anything to distinguish themselves from the others. Everybody is trying to fit in. It's at this time that teachers are required to take loyalty oaths to the United States. It's at this time that books like the Communist Manifesto and the Chinese Little Red Book are banned from American libraries. And it's at this time that entertainers, writers, and directors and movie producers in Hollywood are blacklisted for accusations of being communists. There's a famous group of 10 writers and directors that are blacklisted. In other words, they can't get work anymore, and they're known as the Hollywood 10. This protest is in support of the Hollywood 10. So let's look at how the Republicans get into power. Voters are frustrated over this Red Scare. Voters are frustrated over communism, but voters are also frustrated over the stalemate in Korea. And Eisenhower, who's now a Republican candidate, Eisenhower didn't really have any strong political leanings either way. The Republicans come to him in 1952 and ask him to run, and he says yes. Eisenhower promises to personally go to Korea. The hero of World War II, the supreme Allied commander in Europe, the guy who defeated the Nazis, is promising to go to Korea. Obviously, he'll be able to end this war. He defeated Hitler. The Democrats run Adlai Stevenson from Illinois in 1952. This leads to an overwhelming victory for Eisenhower. And Eisenhower, as promised, visits Korea after winning. And he uses diplomacy. In fact, he even hints to China, who had become involved in the Korean War, that the United States would be willing to use nuclear weapons to end this conflict. That gets China to back off, and we have an armistice, a ceasefire, signed in July of 1953, which ends the Korean War and divides the peninsula into North and South Korea, pretty much along the lines that we know today.